Oh shit, here we go again.
Hey everybody! So sorry this took a while. I was gonna upload a video sooner, but this project ended up being really long. Not to mention, I ended up getting a ton of footage, and because of that, I kind of had to re-edit the video entirely. I'm going to do my best to go through everything, because it was a long process. I decided I would split things up into parts to make the video a little bit better to understand, as the original was pretty unorganized. Alright, let's get started. As you can tell by the title, I'm going to be painting on Pokemon figures. I've had these figures for a long time, from around middle school, I believe. And for a while I thought they were actually legit, but as I've gotten older, the messy paint jobs and poorly done sculpting just reads as bootleg to me. So I decided to show you guys how they look before I do anything to them. I think that Jirachi, Latios, and Latias may have had their molds made from official toys. I mean, honestly, it probably wouldn't be that hard to make your own molds if you got your hands on an official one. The Plusle and Minun, though, are probably the most obvious that they are bootlegs. Their molds aren't really accurate to the actual designs, the proportions are really off, and their tails are way longer than normal. I even decided to get out an official Pikachu and Charmander figure I had, just to compare them, as they're roughly the same size as the rest of the figures. As you can tell, overall, they're definitely a lot better and cleaner than the bootlegs. Because of how wonky they are, I figured it would be an interesting exercise to paint them all. Not only to make them more accurate to the original Pokemon designs, but also to sort of clean them up and give them new life. I will say I originally thought about doing something crazy, or maybe even doing shiny versions, but eventually I decided on doing the original Pokemon designs. I thought it would be easier to compare them to the originals that way. And besides that, I'm a huge Pokemon fan myself, and I honestly really like the original designs. Hopefully that's not too disappointing. I promise I'll do a more crazy and drastic makeover in the future. I have a ton of figures and stuff that I'd like to customize. I'm gonna try and keep this short, mainly due to the fact that I'm stupid and I didn't get footage for this part, but I feel like it's important to mention. So using Epoxy Sculpt, I mixed parts A and B and got this sort of clay-like substance. Epoxy Sculpt is like this really strong two-part clay that dries into sort of a hard plastic-like material. Using the sculpt, I carefully covered the copyright text and Jirachi's face, as I didn't really like the mold. And once they dried in about 3 hours or so, I used some sandpaper to help it transition smoother into the original plastic. Normally, it takes about 24 hours for Epoxy Sculpt to fully cure, but I'm impatient and usually it gets hard enough around the 2 to 3 hour mark. Anyway, if you end up using Epoxy Sculpt, please use gloves when handling it. And honestly, if you just wanted to modify something of yours like I did, air-dry clay would probably work just fine. It is a bit more brittle, but it would essentially serve the same purpose. Aside from that, I also took the time to remove, modify, and reattach Plusle and Minun's tails. Like I mentioned before, they were just way too long, and Minun actually also had a plus sign on their tail, which leads me to believe they likely only had a Plusle mold and decided to just paint it blue instead. I attempted to use hot glue to reattach them, but instead I ended up having to just put a whole bunch of glue just for them to stick, and I end up regretting it because it looks kind of bad. At the end of the day, I wish I had maybe used Epoxy Sculpt or even super glue to help reattach them, but what's done is done. I think it's because the plastic was too smooth and there wasn't really any texture the glue could grab onto, and I actually run into a similar problem with the base coat process, unfortunately. Alright, let's get into the base coat. I'm using white acrylic gesso, and if you aren't familiar with what that is, basically it's a mixture of acrylic paint and paint primer. It helps your paint to adhere better, makes your colors look brighter, and prevents you from having to do like a bajillion coats. This part took way longer than I anticipated, and my guess is likely because the plastic was far too smooth for the paint to stick onto. It took, and I'm not kidding, around like 20 coats just to get a nice opaque covering. I'm not even sure if that's the right number because I ended up losing count. Fortunately, I am a very determined artist and I sat through those layers, eventually even pulling out my hairdryer to help speed up the process. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. You'll see later on, but because I toughed it out doing a bunch of layers with the gesso, it prevented me from doing that with the regular paint, which I'm sure would have ended up being much worse. Even the thought of having to do that for every color makes me want to die inside. So for future reference, if you have something that's really smooth and you're trying to paint it, either A, get out sandpaper to add texture, or B, get out that hairdryer because you have a long day ahead of you. Now, this also took me a long time, but not because I had to do a million coats. Thank God for gesso. I'm not really sure if it fully registers because it's on video, and I'm probably blowing up the video too so you can see a bit better. But these figures are very small. Not the smallest things in the world, mind you, but small nonetheless. So it ended up actually being really difficult to hide my handshake, and there was a lot of back and forth, lots of cleaning up areas, that sort of thing. Fortunately, because of the gesso, it did cut the time down because the paint was pretty opaque, usually in about 2 to 3 coats. But that still doesn't change the fact that my big shaky hands kept making mistakes left and right. And there's still a lot of imperfections in the end results, but I'm still really happy with how they came out. They definitely look better than the original paint jobs. Even despite the struggle, it was still a learning experience because I don't think I've ever painted on something that small before. And again, I'm still really happy with how the end results came out. I brightened some of the colors, made the sort of whitish parts on the legendaries kind of a light gray so the white highlights would pop out, that sort of thing. I mixed all my own colors too, so it was really fun getting to make the colors exactly how I wanted them to be. I think the hardest out of everything was the faces though, because they're just so damn small. I did get some footage of this, but I decided not to record myself doing all of the faces because, well, since they were so small, I ended up having to hold them really close to my face just to make sure I wasn't messing up. And I know I keep saying it, but these things are insanely small. It's not like I haven't customized things before. I just think there was a bit of a learning curve due to the size of the objects, as most of the stuff I painted before was a bit bigger. It is funny looking back on it though, because I promise you in the beginning of this project, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be so easy. Just some modifications and a paint job, no problem. And these things are so small, it'll take me like 2 seconds. What a fool I was. Them being small was the reason it took me like almost 2 to 3 weeks. Finally, after all that painting, I coated all the figures in a thick layer of Liquitex gloss varnish. This was to help protect the paint job, because even though I'll be keeping these out more for display, I still want to help prevent the little scuff marks that they managed to get before I had painted them. Anyway, I really like how they came out. The colors are so much better, especially the softer yellow on the Minun and Plustel. And I'm honestly proud of myself for getting around to painting again. I haven't painted in a while, so it felt really nice doing that again. Which one's your favorite? Mine's definitely Jirachi. I'm usually such a sucker for Pika clones because I love electric types. They're probably my favorite typing, but Jirachi just has such a sweet little face. Oh, and let me know if you would have done something different. I'm sure you guys would have had some really cool ideas. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to drop a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you're new. Hopefully I'll be back with a less time-consuming project. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!